about how to communicate these changes. It's very much about how Ukraine communicates its reforms, the new environment in which these reforms are carried out and communicated, and in particular the role of journalism, especially investigative journalism, in this context. As you know, EUAM works to reform the security sector and law enforcement agencies in Ukraine. We provide strategic advice and operational support to help the security sector become more efficient, more accountable, and enjoy the trust of the public. An important strand of our work is helping our Ukrainian partners improve their strategic communication abilities. This support fundamentally aims at promoting transparency and accountability, and ultimately this is about improving democratic governance. I think it's fair to say that if reform processes are not understood, they will not receive public support, and if they don't receive public support, they risk failure. Ukraine has of course made very important and significant progress in the reform efforts in the past 5 years, although much remains to be done. I think our aim at EUAM is to ensure that progress continues, but also that the progress that has been made is really consolidated. And in order to entrench the reform process and put it towards the path of irreversibility, more impact communications from state institutions will be key. So to that end, we're very honored to see so many of our partners here today, our partners who we work with on strategic communication. We decided to organize this conference in order to provide a forum where participants and partners could openly discuss improve Stratcom in Ukraine. For Ukraine's reform processes to succeed, it will be very important that Ukraine creates a very positive narrative for itself that rightfully recognizes the enormous potential and significant progress that is made in this country. So, what can be done to change the narrative around Ukraine, to improve the narrative around Ukraine in Europe and the rest of the world? And this will be the theme of our first panel. As is clear, Ukraine is also a primary victim of a very significant disinformation campaign carried out by Russia. I think Ukraine has had some considerable successes in combating fake news within its borders, but this phenomenon still poses a significant threat to Ukraine's security. So the question is, how can Ukraine's institutions communicate policy and reform more effectively in the face of a very active disinformation campaign? And this will be the theme of our second panel today. Our third panel focuses on the media, which is of course a key part of any democratic society. We will discuss the relationship between investigative journalists and law enforcement agencies and ask what can be done to strengthen this relationship. Independent investigative journalists is central to uncovering abuses of power, such as corruption and abuses of human rights. And the work of journalists can help law enforcement agencies bring about convictions and actually be a partner to law enforcement agencies. So here I think the fundamental question is, how can journalists be better protected, and how can law enforcement agencies benefit more from a trustful relationship with the media? So a couple of ground rules for today's conference. First of all, we want to have a very open and interactive discussion today. We're not going to sit up on the stage and lecture and preach, but rather we want to make sure that this is a very interactive conference between panelists and the audience. We also intend to structure this in the way that we will give the floor to the panelists. They will make opening statements, and then we will open up to questions and comments. So, without further ado, let me introduce the panelists and hand over to them. First of all, we have Tatiana Kovalchuk, the Deputy Minister of Internal the security sector. Then we also have Ygmin. We have Dimitro, who's the Deputy Minister of Information Policy, and then we have Rebecca Harms, an MEP who. But let me first turn to Tatiana, who I understand may have to leave the panel a little bit early. engagements in the Rada. So I thought we would start with you. Exactly. So let me start by posing this question. I mean, there is. I think it's fair to say that the Ukraine has made considerable progress on reform in the past 5 years, but this is often not acknowledged or recognized. You often hear this discourse that, oh, you know, nothing has changed, we're back in the Yanukovych era even, you know, it's all the same, which I think it's empirically false in many ways. But I think there is an issue here about the narrative. How can we counter this narrative, and what can Ukraine do in particular to change this narrative, to have these accomplishments that have been carried out actually acknowledged in a positive way? So, Tatiana, over to you.
Thank you so much. Maybe I'll skip in Ukrainian because we have our simultaneous translation. Дуже дякую всім за запрошення. Дякую, пане Мінгарелі, дякую вам, Фредеріку, пане Фредеріку, за те, що запросили на цей надзвичайно важливий, дуже нагальний захід, тому що сьогодні ми дійсно можемо говорити про те, що наша комунікація із суспільством, я представляю Міністерство внутрішніх справ, і ми розуміємо, що комунікація із суспільством є дуже нагальною і дуже актуальною.
Really important and relevant and necessary, especially now when we understand how active and proactive civil society is. So first of all, we are really grateful to EUAM, first of all, for organizing, and you initiated a very important communication event, because our ministry every day faces the challenge of communication, and this communication happens in different and very often difficult conditions, and it's very important to us to implement and deliver the correct messages and narrative in our society to our citizens. You said correctly that over the past 5 years, Ukraine has changed, and law enforcement sphere and my ministry has changed significantly as well. And we haven't just changed the name. There was a huge demand after Revolution of Dignity for change. And former militia was not trusted, and the level of trust was below zero, and there was no respect. And I believe that our first and foremost important step was to change the attitude of society, to restore the trust, towards governmental institutions overall, and including law enforcement system, which had been covered in dirt, and it was not the institution which was ideal for Ukrainian society. And for us, the biggest challenge was to change philosophy. And to be honest, after 5 years, I can say that we managed to do so, because we have a clear understanding that for us, European values are the key, the rule of law, and we understand that we need to protect rights and freedom of people, and we could reform and change to provide services and to be service-oriented, even when we provide police services, but we need to keep the balance. When we provide security and secure space for our citizens, it has to be built in service-oriented way, so that the person can feel that their rights is the highest value. And for us in particular, that was the base for development and reformating of the whole system. You know, I don't really like the word reform, because now it has become a buzzword and trendy, but reform, that's a change of shape, of form. And that is the hardest part, to have this transformation. And But any transformation starts with changing the opinions and outlook, and that is the hardest part, because any system, any bureaucratic machine is too big, which includes a lot of people who are very different. And we need to implement new approaches, but not just to implement, but to create preventive mechanisms so that the person feels safe and secure, and that all institutions, they are working for her or him, and they meet their demands and vision. And I believe that that was the biggest challenge for us. And I can proudly say that today we have created a new law enforcement system. We hired new people into the system of police, people with open hearts and a big willingness to work and to change this country. Those who were ready and are ready, even though they face a lot of challenges, to take part of responsibility for the change which is happening in the country, because changes cannot be easy and they don't happen overnight. Usually changes are happening in very turbulent conditions, which is in our country, and our ministry is also a part of Ukrainian realities. And to be honest, now we have the ministry of a new European format. This it's a civil institution which forms policies and coordinates the activity, including law enforcement system. So at this moment, ministry doesn't have law enforcement functions. It's a strategic board, but all law enforcement functions now is given to the police of newly established institution. And with this reform, we started the new service of providing new service centers, which is now, this reform has been a big achievement, and 4 million people have used these services, and it showed that it's possible to change the old bureaucratic centers into new and open ones where you can get services online for free, and it takes you only 1 day, and all kinds of administrative services. So at this moment, every person feels these changes, and I hope that we will have only positive progress in this direction. And also now we have the new approach and form of state migration services. They are changing as well. We can see the results. For example, 10 million of new international passports have been issued, and our citizens could receive. Around 8 million people, they got ID cards of a new format. And about all the proactive activities of the ministry allowed us to create new approaches in communication paradigm with our citizens. And we provide them safety, security, and services. And now we can see that the level of trust is growing. And state and governmental institutions like police, people trust more than they trust some politicians. And it's a victory for us, because we understand that without trust from citizens, we cannot move forward. Of course, we can make mistakes. Yeah, we create a lot of anti-corruption.
Що у нас є виклики, на які ми повинні адекватно і відповідно реагувати. Однак ми не можемо і не маємо права зупинятись, особливо сьогодні, коли є прогрес і коли є таке ставлення суспільства вже до нової системи. І дійсно яскравим так само прикладом ось такого дієвого поєднання наших зусиль із суспільством я можу назвати процес створення, наприклад, нашої стратегії розвитку системи МВС. І це для нас був дуже великий індикатор комунікації, взаємодії із інститутами громадянського суспільства. Зокрема, стратегію було створено і розроблено, знову-таки, абсолютно інклюзивним методом, завдяки підтримки наших міжнародних партнерів, завдяки підтримки і національних громадських організацій, громадських інституцій. І, звичайно, вона пройшла всебічне комплексне обговорення і регіональне обговорення, і отримала високу підтримку від наших громадян. І для цього нам дійсно довелося переформатувати нашу роботу, проте я вважаю, це є одним із наших дійсно показників того, що ми навчилися дослухатися, ми навчилися чути запити громадян і відповідно реагувати на них. Так само я хочу сказати, що дуже є чудовим прикладом такої співпраці є спільна із Кабінетом міністрів та іншими центральними органами виконавчої влади розроблення і реалізації єдиної комунікаційної стратегії щодо досягнення у сфері інтеграції угоди про асоціацію з Європейським Союзом та євроатлантичне партнерство. Насправді вона включає інформування населення про основні досягнення, про основні європейські цінності та підходи, які на сьогодні є квінтесенцією діяльності абсолютно всіх органів державної влади, в тому числі і Міністерства внутрішніх справ. Але ми розуміємо ще такий нюанс, що абсолютно всі комунікативні активності міністерства на сьогодні і всі позитивні наші досягнення і зрушення, вони безпосередньо стикаються із тим супротивом, який ми спостерігаємо з боку агресора, з боку Російської Федерації. Ми розуміємо, що ми сьогодні знаходимося у стані абсолютної інформаційної війни вже протягом 5 останніх років. І насправді ми розуміємо, що нам доводиться кожного дня реагувати і відповідати на ці інформаційні атаки, на фейкові якісь новини. І ми розуміємо про те, що сьогодні ми маємо відповідати на ті виклики, які існують в медіа, тому що, на жаль, у нас є із агресором одне інформаційне поле. І дійсно, таким чином, ось такими гібридними методами країна-агресор намагається маніпулювати, намагається підірвати ті основи демократії, ті основи державотворення, які ми сьогодні з вами цеглина за цеглиною закладаємо у розбудову нашої